Business and community leaders of Utah, welcome to another installment of the Workforce Resilience Through Mental Fitness webinar series from the Utah Community Builders Foundation at the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce. Following up on our launch event from October 29th, and part of this broader campaign, we're bringing to you monthly webinars with experts in the field of mental health to help your business implement policies that will truly make a difference for your employees. Today, we're pleased to have with us Allison Faust. I will let her give her own introduction, but she's going to be talking through how the state's Live On campaign applies to businesses and the workforce here in Utah. With that, I'll turn it over to Allison.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Nick. Let me get my slides pulled up and we will go ahead and kick this off. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my slides now. Just as a reminder, I don't actually have access to the chat box, so the Salt Lake Chamber will be monitoring that. We will have time for question and answer at the end of this presentation, but I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. We'll probably go right up till the hour. I'm hoping to have a little bit of time carved out for questions. So today I'm here to talk to you all about Utah's new statewide suicide prevention campaign called Live On. My name's Allison Faust. I work as the Suicide Prevention Administrator at the Utah Department of Human Services in the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. I also oversee the statewide Utah Suicide Prevention Coalition and help run this Live On account out of our office. I'm going to start with a little video just to give you a taste of what the Live On campaign is and doing, and then we'll kind of dive into some data around why suicide is important to be talked about, especially here in Utah, and then we'll get into the specifics of the campaign itself and how businesses can utilize this information.
Utah is our home, and just as we celebrate our singular state with its unique culture, we also must recognize the unique challenges that face us and affect us all. Unfortunately, suicide is one of those challenges, one that is both deeply personal and in need of a greater collective effort. So the state of Utah is bringing people together to rise to this challenge, to not only survive, but live on. Live On is a mantra of hope and a recognition of resilience. It is a statewide effort to prevent suicide by promoting education, providing resources, and changing our culture around suicide and mental health. Together, we can get through, reach out, lift up, look ahead, and live on.
Okay, so in the state of Utah, we rank 6th in the nation for suicide deaths in the United States. So you'll see here that many of the top 10 states, you can see them highlighted in green here, many of the top 10 states are in this Intermountain West region. And so this certainly isn't a Utah problem. We are very similar to our neighboring states. Suicide is a very complex issue. And so there's not just one reason why we have these increased rates out here in the Intermountain West, but it is important for us to be discussing how we can come up with a comprehensive approach to prevent suicide that is unique to our part of the country. And I'll walk you through a little bit of what our plan for suicide prevention looks like in just a couple of slides. Utah also consistently ranks above the national average for suicide deaths. So you'll see the blue line, the dark blue line is the United States, trending from 1999 all the way to 2017. Now just keep in mind data lags quite a bit behind. So at the end of this year, we should be getting 2018 data. So this is current data. And then you'll see that the light green is Utah. So Utah has been higher than the United States average for quite some time. Again, not one thing that is causing this, which is why it's so important for us to have a comprehensive approach to suicide prevention. Now, this slide is particularly surprising to most people, which is why I like to include it in my presentations. This is suicide deaths by age and sex in the state of Utah. So the dark blue is male, the green is female, and it ranges all the way from age 10 to 17, all the way to 85 plus. Now, typically, if we went off of what we hear in the media and sort of what is talked about most often, people might assume that youths are dying most often by suicide. And that's just not the case. As you see here, youth actually only make up about 6% of suicide deaths in the state of Utah. And the majority of those who die by suicide are adult, middle-aged, working class, specifically male. This is the population that is dying most by suicide. There's a couple reasons you'll notice here. Males do rank higher, significantly higher in all age groups than females. There's a couple reasons for this. Men tend to be a little bit less willing to seek help, just sort of a cultural norm that I feel like we really need to change and to shift and to make it normal and accepted that men seek help and talk about their feelings. So that's one reason, is women tend to be a little more willing to seek help. The second piece of this is that men do tend to choose a more lethal method, such as a firearm. And so, you know, when you talk about opportunities for intervention and life-saving measures and getting people to a hospital and helping them recover from an attempt, that's very hard to do when somebody chooses a firearm. And so those are kind of the two reasons why you see the big difference between male and female here on this slide. And so you'll notice throughout the Live On campaign, I have a couple other videos I'm going to show you. We do have quite a bit of messaging around firearm safety and how that can help prevent suicide. Now, this slide might be a little bit hard to read. I do apologize. I had to screenshot it out of a report because it's not quite public yet. But this is a slide demonstrating the industries, the working industries in Utah that are higher risk for suicide. Nearly 1 in 3 working age men who died by suicide worked in the construction and extraction industry or the installation or repair industry. So these are by far our highest risk age groups, which I think is really interesting and an opportunity for these industries to figure out what their role is in suicide prevention and partner and help create a culture of safety in their own organizations. There are a lot of other industries sort of listed in here, but those are by far our highest. Some of the other ones that you see that have high rates are farming, fishing, forestry, you know, management particularly also has high numbers, even though they may be at the lower end of sort of this, list. So I just wanted to highlight that just a little bit as to why workplace suicide is important and something we can no longer ignore. It's something that we have to figure out how to implement suicide prevention strategies in our workplaces. So at the state level, we do have the Utah Suicide Prevention State Plan. This is due to be updated, I can't believe it, already in January. So we'll be putting out a new one in the new year with some edits, but this essentially is guided by our Utah Suicide Prevention Coalition, which is made up of community members, suicide survivors, service providers, researchers, and others that are dedicated to saving lives and advancing suicide prevention efforts in Utah. This is a little bit of a glimpse of what is in our state plan. You can find the full plan on liveonutah.org. On the homepage, we have it linked there so that you can see everything that we're working on throughout the state. But these are just some examples, or this is a snapshot of what kind of things that we have outlined in our state plan. So reducing access to lethal means, increasing availability and access to quality physical behavioral health care, increasing connection to family, individuals, communities, and social institutions, increasing coping skills and problem-solving skills, and increasing comprehensive data collection. All of these things help us, when we talk about a comprehensive approach, what that means is we can't just do one thing, right? We can't just have a training and consider that, well, we did suicide prevention in our organization, right? We have to be thinking about how we can instill skills in individuals, how we can create safe cultures in institutions, how we can create supports for people who have lost someone to suicide, and how we can continue to collect data along the way. So how does a campaign fit into a comprehensive state plan for suicide prevention? So I've highlighted a couple things that this campaign addresses. We do a lot of messaging around changing social norms and promoting help seeking and recovery, reducing access to lethal means, so a lot of messaging around firearm safety, increasing support for people who have lost someone to suicide, and using safe messaging, right? Because it's important that we talk about suicide, but the way that we talk about suicide is extremely important. And so the way that this campaign talks about suicide is, or suicide prevention, is in a hopeful way that encourages people to live on. So this is the coalition that I have been referencing. This is kind of the structure that we have. So we have sort of the umbrella of the Utah Suicide Prevention Coalition, but there are many work groups that fit under this and that are working on different areas of our state plan. So we have community awareness, we have an LGBTQ plus work group, a faith work group, a work group that does clinical training and quality healthcare improvement, and then of course one that works specifically on firearms and opioid reduction. Now, the one I have circled here, we do have a workplace work group as well. I'll highlight the resource at the end, but hopefully you all saw the resource that we put out in collaboration with the Salt Lake Chamber a couple weeks ago at the launch event that Nick mentioned. It's a toolkit for workplaces on how to implement suicide prevention strategies, where to start, and how to have conversations within their organization around assessing, are we a mentally healthy workplace, and are there places we can improve? And so I encourage you to check that out. I believe it's linked on the Salt Lake Chamber website, and I'll show it a little bit later in the presentation. But this work group is fairly new, and so we are kind of playing around with the structure, but I think the goal is that we have actual workplaces that sit on this, that are able to help us inform efforts, create resources that are going to be useful and meaningful to organizations across the state. And so if anybody is interested, I'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation. Feel free to reach out and let's chat. I would love to pick your brain. So this campaign was funded in a variety of ways. This is really important because I have to thank everyone who made this possible. So under House Bill 393, the Utah State Legislature actually agreed to match a $1 million in private funds. So if we found private donors were able to raise up to $1 million, they would match that and create a $2 million campaign. So they created the Governor's Suicide Prevention Fund, where people could donate to this campaign. And we had many private funders come to the table, and we really came up with the private match very quickly. But we had private donations from Intermountain Healthcare, Greg and Julie Cook, who are the co-founders of doTERRA. They made a private donation. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the University of Utah, Rocky Mountain Power, and the Utah Shooting Sports Council. A third piece of this that was really cool that helped make up this last piece of funding was that on the tax return forms, people were able to make a private donation, and we had about $25,000 that were raised through individuals across the state. And so our campaign was born. Now, with prevention efforts this large, we do have to have really intentional coordination and alignment with stakeholders, because there were so many people that contributed to this campaign funding-wise and just sort of support-wise. And so we have many different people that sit on a sort of advisory group that make up sectors from healthcare, faith leaders, public health, crisis services, suicide survivors, advocacy groups, firearm retailers, and government leaders. And they are responsible for a little bit more, so separate from the coalition. This is the group that actually guides the work and helps frame the messages and give approvals on direction and content. And so still sort of looped in and under the umbrella of the coalition, but a little bit of a separate group. And we report to the coalition and coordinate ongoing with the governor's office and the Utah State Legislature. Now, as we were developing the content, this was also a very collaborative process. We wanted to make sure that the funders and the researchers and the people who know suicide prevention well felt like the goals of the campaign were being met. And so we did key stakeholder interviews and asked a variety of questions such as, what do you think, why do you think suicide is such a big issue in Utah specifically? What is driving this? How can we change stigma in Utah? How will we know if we're actually successful with this campaign? What do we need to be measuring? What should the short-term and long-term goals of the campaign be? How would you determine success? And so on. These are just some examples of questions we asked to help frame the message. But essentially what came out of these interviews, specifically from survivors of suicide attempts and survivors of suicide loss, has become our guiding principle. And what somebody said to us was, don't tell me to live, teach me how to live. And so we've really used this as we frame our messages to make sure that we are providing skills and tangible things that people can take away rather than just raising awareness for suicide. So now we're getting into the creative content of the campaign itself. Most suicide prevention campaigns historically have focused on crisis services, right? So listing the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is of course important, death statistics, and really depict images of isolation. And this is true nationwide. This is just what suicide prevention has meant in the public space. It's been a lot of depressing images. So I want to show you some examples of, and just kind of ask you to process. I'm going to show a couple different slides, and these are real campaigns and real suicide prevention messages that are used across the nation. And I want you to just ask yourself, how does this make me feel? What is this image conveying? What is this trying to teach me, right? Just kind of ask yourself some of those questions as I click through. So how did those make you feel? Now, I know I can't see the chat box, but I think as I go through those images, I kind of notice, right, in every image, people are alone, people are isolated, people are disconnected. Yes, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is listed in each and every one, but it doesn't necessarily instill hope and make you feel like, if I were to call this number, I could get help. So it's a lot of like loneliness, a lot of, what are next steps? Like, here's the lifeline if you're in crisis, but what else is there to suicide prevention? And so what did we want to do differently? We had to process a lot of existing campaigns and think about what we wanted to do differently and what we wanted to teach people in our state. So the data experts, mental health experts, survivors, and friends and family told us that we needed to follow the following core messages. We needed to fight the stigma against suicide, encourage people to talk about suicide and seek help when they need it. We needed to empower friends and family, give them the skills to have difficult conversations and be able to reach out to people they're concerned about. build awareness of resources that are available in our state beyond just the crisis lifeline. What else is there? Maybe if you're not in crisis at this point, right? What else can we do to prevent suicide? And most of all, we wanted to instill hope. And so all of our messages are around hope. Now, the only acceptable goal, right, similar to when we talk about the zero fatality campaign, right? We may never reach a goal of zero, right? We will never reach a goal of zero. That's just the nature of this work. But it's the only acceptable goal, right? We're never going to say we want to reach only 100 suicides. That just doesn't feel right. It doesn't make sense. And so our only acceptable goal, the only thing we're sort of keeping in our minds is that zero suicides is the only acceptable goal. And so how do we reach everybody that needs this message? So what we decided to do was focus on a behavior change campaign. And so what behavior change advertising does is that it assumes that the general public consider themselves to be good people, right? And they believe that what they're doing is the right thing every day. They want to do the right thing every day. But even though people might agree with our goal that they want to prevent suicides, that doesn't mean that they know how to work towards that goal. And so that's the importance of this campaign, is teaching each Utahn how to get help and how to give help. So this is where we created the Live On campaign. This is our logo. It's a handwritten sticky note. And the reason that we developed this logo was because suicide prevention, to be effective, it needs to be a collective effort. But it's also very personal. And so having a handwritten logo represents the role of each individual and what the role they play in suicide prevention. So, this really helps when we do community mobilization activities or press conferences, that people can actually take, live on buttons or sticky notes and write it for themselves and what it means to live on for themselves. And so really just owning the brand. And this is our sort of mantra, rally cry, whatever you want to call it. But Live On is a statewide effort to prevent suicide by promoting education, providing resources, and changing our culture around suicide and mental health. Together, we can get through, reach out, lift up, look ahead, and live on. I have another video for you.
In the scope of a lifetime, 10 minutes may seem like no time at all. But when it comes to suicide, 10 minutes is often long enough to reconsider the decision to end one's own life. If you have a friend or family member who is struggling with suicide or depression, talk to them about temporarily storing their firearms away from their home, because even a 10-minute delay can make a lifetime of difference. Let's help end tragic firearm deaths in Utah.
So how do we instill hope, right? What do we need to focus our messages on? And what we decided is that our messages needed to focus on protective factors for suicide, which are research-based, known factors that can create a buffer against risk and prevent suicide. And so these are a lot of these are outlined, worded a little bit differently, but outlined in our state plan for suicide prevention and in national plans for suicide prevention. But we wanted our messages to focus on connection, providing healthy coping skills, teaching people to reach out, and creating safe environments. And I think that this is where and why I was sort of asked to speak on this campaign today, is because workplaces can play such a big role when we talk about creating safe environments, creating spaces that employees feel safe, to talk about mental health, talk if they're struggling, reach out for help. We spend a lot of our lives at work. Of course, not me. I've been working from home for like 11 months now, a long time. But we spend a lot of time at work or doing work. And so what can we do to help our employees, feel empowered to do those things? And then, of course, building access to resources. Now, we did do a spot with Steve Young, if any of you know who he is. And this is a really great one that speaks to men's mental health and sort of fighting the stigma against that.
Men can take a hit. We can tough it out. We're told to suck it up a lot more than we're asked to talk it out. We don't ask for help because we should be able to handle it on our own. But the truth is, the only way to tackle what's up here is by talking it out. To simply say what we're feeling. With friends, family, or the Utah Crisis Hotline is always available. Put this number in your contacts right now. And if you're ever wondering if you have someone to talk to, you do, 24/7.
So I think that's a really good example, you know, when we talked about, we wanted to show connection. Letting them know they're not alone. And I just think that that's so powerful. And of course, still giving the Utah Crisis Line as a resource is important, but just showing the things that can also prevent suicide. Now, we're working on a lot of things. So I'm going to show you some fun examples of many of the different assets we've been putting together. We did launch a website earlier this year, so liveonutah.org. And we just launched, I think, about a couple weeks ago, a month ago, the Spanish version of that website. It was a little bit behind just due to some translation issues, but you should be able to sort of toggle at the top and hover over a button that'll translate it. You've probably noticed along I-15 we have billboards. If any of you have seen them, they say this is suicide prevention. I'll show you some examples, I think, on the next few slides. We've been doing a lot of media, news segments, PR opportunities to just get the information out there about the campaign since it is so new. I don't think I talked about the timeline, so just as a little bit of context, we got all the funding, and then the campaign was sort of announced as the Live On campaign in March, but new creative content actually didn't even happen until September. So this is a very new resource, a very new campaign. So we're working hard with PR and social media to really get this message out there. We also have been doing radio, using social media influencers, digital content and videos on YouTube, and lots of community partnerships, which I'll talk about. But this is the website. It's divided up into a Get Help section. So if it's you who's struggling, it has a lot of great resources around coping skills and ways to sort of delay and distract, as well as crisis resources, mental health treatment resources, etc. The Give Help section is for if you're concerned about someone, and how to offer help and support, how to recognize warning signs for suicide. There's a lot of education around that. And then, ways that you can help link people to those resources. And then under the resource tab, there are calendar events, I think, or there might be a new tab here now with calendar events, but resources for trainings, how to get trained to recognize warning signs for suicide, which I think is a great next step for businesses and for just individuals in general to be able to play a role in prevention. So I encourage you to go check out this website. It's a great resource. These are the billboards that I was mentioning that hopefully you've seen around I-15. All of them really focused this first sort of round of billboards. We wanted to focus on connection really heavily. So you'll notice that everybody is sort of spending time with one another. The other thing that we're focusing on that you can see kind of in the hiking one or the one where they're playing music is around coping skills, right? What things can you do that actually improve your mental health? And so this was kind of our first round. We'll have a second round of billboards with a new message, but related message coming out in March. So, but these have been up for quite some time. So hopefully you've all had a chance to see them if you leave your house and you're not working from home like I am. I do have a radio spot that's pretty new that I wanted to play for you all.
This is Dave's phone. Leave me a message.
Hey, Dad. I just drove past the park you took me to on my 10th birthday. Remember how you fell into the stream? I just wanted to let you know I was thinking about you. Call me back. Love you.
Reminding someone of their worth is suicide prevention. Learn more at liveonutah.org.
Oops. Here we go. So as you can see, real tangible things that people can do. I think, one of the biggest things that when people hear presentations, just in general, not about the Live On campaign, but about suicide prevention, people want to know, how can I get involved, right? And they think that it's got to be this big ask, that they have to be involved, in this big effort, big coalition, or work at the crisis line. And all of those things are really amazing things if people want to do. But I think it's really important to understand that suicide prevention can be done on such a basic individual level with just your close-knit, like family, friends, just by giving someone a phone call and saying that you're thinking about them and you care about them, right? Reminding them of their worth, specifically when people are struggling with their mental health, can make such a huge difference. And so those are the kind of messages that we really try to promote. This is an example of what we do on social media. So we do have a Facebook and Instagram account if you want to follow those. But we do kind of skill building. So this one is an example of like an action plan. So, if somebody is struggling, it's helping them, in the clinical world, we call it a safety plan, but we wanted to make it a little bit more relatable and something that people can do without having, a clinical diagnosis or seeing a therapist. These are things that you can do yourself. What are the things that trigger these emotions? How do you cope with these emotions? What kind of things distract you? Who are some people in your life that are helpful, right? At what point is it too much for me and I do need to reach out to that professional help? And who is that for me? Is it my therapist? Is it the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline? And then kind of this last step around creating safe environments. So what are ways that you can stay away from harmful objects if you are considering suicide? So this is just one example of tangible skill building. Now, social media influencers has been, a learning curve for me, but it's actually been really impactful and really helpful. And so our marketing agency has relationships with a lot of different social media influencers across the state. So a lot of you probably recognize specifically the person on the right. Mr. Charlie Bird was like the mascot at BYU for a long time. I think he got some awards around that. So people who have a large following on social media, and instead of us trying to gain followers and get our message out there, instead we partner with these kind of people who already have followers, who already have an influence. And we ask them to share our message. And so that's what all these people have done. These are just a couple examples. There are many more, but they share the message around Live On and suicide prevention and offer some skills and some resources. And so people are able to access them that way. We've done a lot of radio, print, and news segments, specifically around the launch of the campaign, but now we've kind of been doing ongoing as sort of resource promotion. We're partnering for a holiday special this month, I think on the 20th or 23rd of December, where we'll be able to show a lot of the Live On commercials and offer resources to people that way. So hopefully, if you haven't already, you'll start seeing some of these. This one played in my gym the other day, so they are getting out there. So I'm going to play this one. This is another firearm safety education.
Mom,
Dad,
try to understand.
sometimes I'm gonna be a little impulsive.
Sometimes I'm gonna be a lot impulsive.
I mean, I'm a teenager.
Like when I went through that really bad breakup.
To you, it may have been no big deal.
But to me, it was my whole world.
It was my whole life.
Remember when I got arrested?
I actually thought that I would never be able to show my face in school again.
And when that rumor about me started spreading
All over social media.
I thought it would never end.
Like, I thought the only solution was for me to end.
Not to freak you out or anything.
But the leading cause of death in Utah
For teens,
Is suicide. And nearly half of those suicides are from firearms.
And sorry, but they're usually yours.
So help us out here.
because we may be impulsive, but
We want to live.
Almost all the time.
But in case there are times that we forget, keep your guns and ammo locked up safely.
Keep your guns and ammo locked up safely.
Locked up safely.
Because doing this little thing can make a big difference.
Okay, so we've had some business partners jump on with the Live On campaign pretty quickly. So I wanted to show some of the messages and how we're able to, when we partner with a business, we are really able to sort of share a brand message and kind of tailor the Live On campaign to meet the needs of their community and the goals of their organization. So UTA kind of wanted to do some stuff on like see something, say something. And so we kind of framed this as, you know, suicide prevention risk factors, right? So see withdrawal, say something, see isolation, say something, see mood changes, say something. And then there's kind of the second piece of, you know, people are waiting around at the tracks. And so this is an opportunity to message around that. And so look left, look right, look ahead, and live on. Standing still is first step to moving forward in some of those messages. The second one that's actually a new partner, and so these messages are currently in development and not quite out yet. We'll probably do some sort of PR launch event around this, but this will actually be statewide DIs. And we're going to be doing messaging to their employees and to those who are, you know, going to the DI stores. So, you know, thanks for giving me a second chance. You deserve one too. Reach out and help push another one forward. That's an example of like what would be on a shopping cart. And then some buttons for employees. So listen, care, be there. Share a little kindness with yourself. There's a lot of really cool messages that, you know, we were able to do around this idea of, you know, a secondhand store. Another, excuse me, another arena that we are trying to tailor messaging is through local mini grants. And so we have 9 mini grants across the state. I know that they look a little congested in this one area, and it looks like we're missing a lot of the state. But since this is such a new campaign, you know, we actually were able to award to everyone who applied. These are the only counties that applied. And so hopefully we'll have a new, you know, a little bit more recognition next year and get additional counties on board for following years. But we are working with Bear River Health Department, San Juan Counseling Center, Summit County, Wasatch County, Weber, Northeastern Utah, which is like the Daggett-Duchesne area, the Utah Pride Center, Latino Behavioral Health, and the Urban Indian Center as well. And these agencies, you know, we firmly believe that to really mobilize communities around the message of suicide prevention, we need the locals to help inform the efforts, because what works in an urban area doesn't always work in a rural area. What works in our sort of general population doesn't work in the Native American population or the Latino population or even our LGBTQ population. And so we wanted to get people on board who could help us craft those messages and make it speak to those populations. So these are some examples of what is in the works so far. These mini grants just sort of took off in September, so they're still in development, but all 9 of them should be done by July. But this is what we did in the Daggett-Duchesne area. They have a lot of trade workers, construction workers. And so they wanted to do some messaging around sort of breaking the stigma around manly men, and that it is manly, and to reach out and seek help. So there are some messages in here that are going to be done hopefully at their local hardware stores out there. But things like suck it up is not a coping skill, mask your face, not your feelings, walls are for houses, not for feelings, have a heart-to-heart over a couple of steaks. Then there's some like paint sticks and pencils that can be in hardware stores. And they've also put up some billboards as well in their area. So these are just some fun examples of what we've done in that area. Latino behavioral health, we are working on getting into Rancho Market. And so they've taken some, put some materials in Spanish, but essentially what these mini grants are about is taking the message to the people, right? It's not asking people to, just go to this website, right? It's bringing it to places people already are, whether that's work, whether that's the grocery store or the hardware store. We're taking the message and the resources to them, to places where they'll already be. And so I think that that's why this campaign is and will be so effective. Now this one, I will say I've never felt so old. We worked with some youth in Wasatch County to create some messages. Now these won't all be posters. We're looking at like wraps, computer screensavers, and things like that to be able to message around the school and the students. But just some fun messages that are kind of hip, I guess you would say, or they probably wouldn't say hip, but don't sleep on your friend's stress, be weird, be basic, either way slay. That feeling when you check on a friend is straight fire. So there's just some fun messages that they helped create so that we are able to also reach a youth population. And this will, of course, link to the Safe UT app, if you're not familiar with, is an app available to all schools, including higher education, where youth can chat with a crisis counselor anonymously, or they can send in tips if they're concerned about someone. So that resource will be promoted in addition to Live on Utah. We also, a piece of this campaign is we are doing stories from survivors to make these messages really, authentic and inspire hope and put faces. Like, these are real people who struggled and who got through. And we find stories of recovery are particularly helpful for people who are struggling. And so we've just finished our first two. We're working on some in Spanish. I think we have time, so I will show both of these. These are just the 30-second clips, I think, but we have longer versions.
Most of us are thinking about death at some point in our life. I mean, after that whole experience, I am passionate. I don't just say Jeremy died. Like, I tell people, like, he killed himself. I allow myself the permission and the time to have those feelings that aren't okay. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And what I've been working on the last couple of months is moving from okay into like happy and successful and like blissful and really enjoying and savoring life. I have more than half my life to live, and it's going to look way different than I thought it was going to. But I want my kids to know, and the best way to do that is to model that for them, that we can move forward, that we can be happy, and we can choose life.
So that's an example of one of our
most of us
lost survivors. So somebody she lost her husband to suicide. This is an example of lived experience of someone who has experienced thoughts of suicide and suicide attempts. So I'll play this one really quickly.
I didn't ever find people that talked about suicide or prevention of suicide or depression or anxiety. And someone that struggled being transgender, not even knowing that term till later in life, suicide and depression played major roles throughout my entire life. My first attempt was at the age of 8, and the last thing I ever want is another child at that age thinking that's the only option. You have to find who works for you, who's going to call you out on things, who's going to help you process things. When you find that, it's amazing the strength that will come out of that. And that was the case with me. I had an amazing counselor that helped me process things, helped me process all my childhood trauma that I went through, my military trauma that I went through, and helped me find who I was. As a result, I love life. I see life in color. It's amazing, and I want that for everyone. I want everybody to see how beautiful life can be and enjoy it with each other. I didn't ever find people.
Okay. So in the last portion of my presentation, I've talked a lot about the background of this campaign, and I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I think it's so incredibly important, one, to show you sort of all the thought that has gone into this and truly creating a behavior change campaign that is based in science rather than just an awareness campaign. Two, to just kind of talk about the sustainability of this campaign, that there are a lot of funders that are really bought into this, and this is something we're really excited about to see long term. And then so in this last part, we've done a lot of really robust evaluation, and I wanted to show you some of the key findings that we had through our initial baseline data around what is happening, what the stigma is like in Utah specifically. So the reason that we're measuring this is because we want to be able to say that this campaign has been effective. If there is something that is not working, how do we sort of adapt and change our message? But essentially, we want to know what works and what doesn't work. We want to be able to illuminate the successes. So if it is working, we want to be able to show that, and we want to justify long-term funding for this with our state legislature. And this will help us ultimately be able to show that we're making long-term behavior change. So this household survey asks a number of questions. It's done by phone by the Gardner Policy Institute and Lighthouse. So we have a contract with the Gardner Policy Institute to do this evaluation, and they've been a great partner. We ask questions around stigma, help seeking, perception of suicide. Do people feel empowered to make a change? What is their knowledge of suicide prevention and warning signs for suicide? And what is firearm storage like in their home? One of the things that we found that we thought was interesting, we did find that 94% of people strongly agree that it's important for other people to seek professional help if they're thinking about suicide, which quite honestly is amazing. To have anything in the 90s, right, when we do a statewide survey is amazing. So we loved seeing that people actually understand that suicide is a problem and that people need professional help. But where the discrepancy came in was around seeking help for yourself. Only 75%, which is still, high in comparison to sometimes data we get through these surveys, but about a 20% difference between this and the previous question. So only 75% of people agree that seeking help for themselves is important. And a lot of that comes from stigma, right? So we then asked, well, why do you feel like, you can't seek help? What is a barrier to you? And so some of the things that came out of this were, not being able to afford treatment or lack of treatment access, right? So maybe our rural areas, or not knowing how or where to even start to get help. There were a lot of things mentioned around this theme of despair. So just a lack of hope, feeling like nothing will help, having a lack of social support, people who will help them get help, right? Because we know that a social support system is extremely important. And then a lot around stigma. So people are still feeling for themselves to seek help. They are embarrassed. They have a fear of disappointing others, a fear of losing their job, and just overall social stigma. And so we do have a lot of work to do. 59% of people said that nothing would prevent them from helping someone close to them who is thinking about suicide. However, there were concerns expressed around these things, people not knowing what to say or do. They want to help their friend, but they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. They're afraid there is nothing they could do, or they're afraid that talking about it would make them actually attempt suicide, or they're afraid they would just make it worse, right? And so this gives us an opportunity, I think, to really do some heavy messaging around how do you have a conversation around suicide? What are the resources? If you know someone who is struggling, talking about suicide doesn't increase risk. It actually relieves stress and can significantly reduce a person's risk. And so we have an opportunity to do a lot with this data. And then just general resource awareness, I think we can do a lot to promote resources in our workplaces and just kind of generally in our family, friend circles, let people know about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The Warm Line is available to individuals who are not in crisis but just want to talk to somebody. So this is more run by like peer support specialists. And then we have the Safe UT app, which I mentioned, that are for school settings. They are working on making that more widely available to people as well. But we want people to know that these are available to everyone. So kind of our next steps for this campaign is we're going to continue to gather qualitative, quantitative data, continue to develop new messages based on the data that we just received back that I showed you, and continue to seek new community business partners. So how can you get involved? As I've sort of mentioned, we have social media channels. I encourage you to follow those. We have the statewide Suicide Prevention Coalition, but we also have coalitions across the state that work on substance abuse prevention, prevention of suicide, domestic violence, kind of all of those shared risk factors. And we can connect you with local coalitions if you're interested. Use liveonutah.org, promote that as a resource. And then kind of the last thing that I think is a great next step, schedule a training. We have many trainings that are focused on recognizing warning signs for suicide. We've done these specifically QPR and Working Minds in countless workplaces, and it's been extremely effective. My organization last year made it mandatory for all employees. And so we trained over, I think, 400 people within DHS in this training, and it was extremely effective. So I think that's a great next step. I have one more video, and then I want to walk through some practical tips and resources for workplaces, and then we'll open up for questions.
Last year I was at my lowest, going through some pretty serious depression. A couple of friends of mine stopped by the house and said they were worried about me. Said they'd feel a lot better if they could hold on to my firearms until things turned around. I think they saved my life.
If your loved ones are struggling, talk to them about temporarily storing their guns away from their home, because things do get better.
Again, firearms can be a sensitive topic, but the way that we're trying to message around it, is not a legislative issue, is not a sort of gun rights issue. We're trying to message around the opportunity that friends and families have to have these conversations, right? And how can you make sure that you lock up your firearms in your home to keep your family safe? So workplace suicide prevention, just some considerations. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't talk about the additional resources outside of the Live On campaign. So employment in itself is protective. So when people have a job, they have a sense of purpose, they have a way that they're making a living and a little bit more financial stability. So employment in itself is actually protective against suicide, which is really great and puts employers in a really unique position. Some individuals can benefit from extra support in getting and retaining jobs. So just sort of for consideration, as well as involving people with lived experience and behavioral health issues. These people have a lot to offer as you're trying to think through what can our organizations do to create safe cultures. These people can be extremely helpful. But employers will benefit from all employees, all employees, all employers are going to benefit from having mentally healthy workplaces, right? It just makes good business sense if we're investing in our employees. And so as a reminder, we do have a comprehensive plan for suicide prevention. It's not kind of a one and done, like promote this campaign and you're done, but I do think that awareness campaigns speak to that piece around changing culture, and it's a very good first step for organizations, in addition to having employees trained to recognize warning signs for suicide. Both of those things really help change culture and reduce risk of suicide. These are a couple resources that I think I've mentioned throughout the training at some point. This is the Suicide Prevention Employer Toolkit that we worked with the Salt Lake Chamber and Nick specifically on, that's available on the Salt Lake Chamber website. This is a great place to start with kind of an assessment of your organization and think about where you want to go and what kind of opportunities do you have to create a mentally healthy workplace. There's also, sometimes, regardless of how healthy of a workplace we have, we sometimes still lose employees to suicide. And so there's also this national resource around, if you lose an employee to suicide, what do you do, and what's the most appropriate way to handle this and the safest way to handle this, because the way that we respond can either increase risk for others or be protective. And so it's something we have to take into consideration as well. So I can send the link out to these to Nick after this presentation. But these are the 3 trainings that we generally promote: QPR, Working Minds, and Mental Health First Aid. I'm happy to tell you more about those if you send me an email and write that down at the end of this training. So what can you do to support your employees' mental health during COVID-19? Participate in awareness campaigns. It's a great time to be, doing things via email, via social media, because we're all kind of doing this remote thing. Publishing educational articles in your newsletter about mental health, that really changes culture. Creating opportunities for real social networks or buddy peer support programs, right? Opportunities for people to connect is really what that comes down to. Promoting your EAP and other mental health resources, substance abuse screenings. We have several free ones available on our DSAMH website. Take this time to train your employers and train your employees to have these difficult conversations. For some people, business is a little slower right now, or at least a little bit different right now. And so it is a good time to kind of maybe do some virtual trainings. Consider making reasonable accommodations for those who are struggling mentally, right? And when I say reasonable, it might be something like, no, they can't, be gone for weeks at a time, but maybe they're really struggling and they're not sleeping. And so maybe we just kind of talk about a later start date, right? A later start time, during the workday. So maybe they're starting at 9 or 10 instead of 7 or 8. Things that just kind of, that are reasonable, that we can do, that still make good business sense for us. So what can everyone do right now? Make sure you put the Suicide Prevention Lifeline in your phone. Schedule a training to learn the warning signs and learn how to start a conversation about suicide. Check in with your friends, check in with your family, have meaningful conversations, make meaningful connections. That's kind of, really, really important right now. Just some additional resources here. I'm not going to read through them all, but feel free to take a picture with your phone. These are just, the warm line that I mentioned, some different apps that are available, and the crisis line and NAMI mentor line. So here's my contact information. Feel free to email me if you're interested in a training or interested in being a part of your local coalition, or maybe the workplace work group to help inform practices, or if you just have additional questions, feel free to reach out. So thank you all. I know we have just a few minutes left, but I'm happy to take questions.
Allison, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to walk through all this content. There's a lot of really good information there that you've presented, so thank you for that. I want to encourage those watching, if you have any questions, to plug that into the Q&A tab just here on the Zoom platform at the bottom of your screen. Click on the Q&A box and plug in any questions you have. And so, Allison, one thing to mention, and you kind of touched on this during your presentation, but in terms of what employers can do today, of course, the folks watching today and who will be watching this on demand later as it's posted are probably largely going to be employers wondering, well, what can I do with my employees right now to try and help make a difference? And so one of the things I would wonder if you could expand on a little bit, and we talked about this in the Suicide in the Workforce Prevention Toolkit, but treating people who work for you not as simply a cog in the machine or an expendable employee, but making sure they feel that they feel their value and worth as a person, not simply a quote unquote employee. Can you talk a little bit about, from what you've seen, why that is kind of an important shift for employers to consider as they look at how to apply this to their own employees?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think, from a business standpoint, when employers are happier, they're going to stay longer, they're going to work harder, and you're going to get, more product or, whatever that is for your organization. So that's one reason, right? To create sort of this culture where people feel sort of accepted, happy, like they can, see themselves being there long term. But on the mental health side of things, we spend so much time in our workplaces, and it, regardless if you like your job or not, it's draining. And so we have to create safe places where people can reach out for help. I don't know, just kind of break that stigma where you have to leave your feelings at the door, right? You come into work and you leave your personal life behind you, right? That's just not realistic, right? Just like if you have a bad day at work and you go home, sometimes you're irritable with your family. It's hard to leave those emotions at the door. And so, no, it doesn't have to become this therapy session where you're allowing people to talk about their feelings all the time. But if somebody is really struggling, they need to know that this is a safe place. My employer is a safe person to talk to, and I'm valued here. So hopefully that sort of answers your question. It goes into a lot more detail in, that toolkit that we mentioned, but there's just so many reasons why it just makes sense.
Thank you. So one final question. I don't see any folks plugging anything on the Q&A window, but maybe one question for you, and then we can wrap up. But for a business owner watching this, or an HR director or a manager, if you were to identify one thing that's maybe one really specific actionable item that people can look at, if you were to say, well, if you do nothing else as a result today, here's the one thing, the first most important step that you can take for your organization as it relates to the mental wellness of your employees, what would you say that number one thing is that they just have to go out and do today?
That is such a hard question. I have so many things. But I do think, I've mentioned training. And I think that this is so important to have, to be able to recognize when somebody is struggling. And essentially, like, a lot of times what that comes down to is just knowing your employees and watching for significant changes in behavior, right? When all of a sudden somebody who's pretty consistent at work is now showing up a little bit later, or, not being as productive with their time, that might be an indication that somebody is struggling. And so having these conversations and trainings specifically with management, but also just with employees, because, they interact on a different level and can recognize things that maybe managers don't always see. But I do think training is a great first step, and promoting resources such as the Live On campaign.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Allison, for your time today, and for all the work you're doing in the Suicide Prevention Coalition at the state level and with the Live On campaign. As you mentioned at the beginning, this is a great partnership between the Utah Community Builders and Salt Lake Chamber and Live On at the state. And just as a reminder for those watching, this is going to be an ongoing series as we continue to provide webinar content to give some more in-depth instruction and training, and also some dialogue each month moving forward through at least May of next year. So for more information on this and some of the other content as part of the Workforce Resilience through Mental Fitness program, please visit slchamber.com/workforce resilience. And Allison, thank you again for your time, and we look forward to continue working together on this issue.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.